Hello, everyone, and welcome to Recruiting is No Joke. I'm your host, Joe Lalji. Super excited to be here with you guys. I have another great guest, and we're going to look at everything that's trending when it comes to recruitment, hiring, the job market, and we'll just see what people are saying on social media. So we've got some juicy topics today, and I'm super excited. But first, I want to welcome our guest, Rani Mavram, who is founder and CEO of and Complete basically helps candidates with salary negotiation, which we're going to talk about today. It's been some interesting articles. But Rani, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here and super excited just to hear what you have to say on some of these topics. So welcome on.
Thanks so much, Joel. Excited to hear what's trending and share a little bit more about what we're seeing with Complete compensation globally, domestically.
Yeah. And I feel like compensation, it's just such a hot topic, and lots of people have thoughts on like salary negotiation. Lots of people have thoughts on what appropriate pay should be. So very excited to get going. Why don't you give us just a quick intro too on what Complete is? I know I kind of gave a little bit of a run through, but I'd love to just hear from your point of view what it is you're doing.
Absolutely. Complete helps startups and later stage companies manage compensation workflows. So that includes everything from the offer process of actually explaining to candidates what that total comp looks like. Newsflash, most folks don't understand it, and we'll dig into that a little bit more today. We also help customers manage their levels, bands, interpret market data, and actually run their compensation merit cycles, which include where they make longer term decisions around who they're going to keep, who they're going to stay, whether they incorporate performance as a measure for compensation, and a lot more. But at the crux of it, we really do believe that compensation is a topic that should be understood, and have invested quite a bit in that compensation literacy across managers, employees, and recruiters, which we'll definitely talk about.
Which I love too, because I think we've talked offline, and some of these compensation packages, they get really complicated, and it's hard for people to understand what they are. And I also do feel like anytime you're talking about money, people get kind of awkward, and then they don't ask questions. And I really love that that's where you're innovating, and that's where you're spending the time. And I feel like this is an area that doesn't get enough attention, because it's just like you think about the salary and the offer at like one point in the process. But I know you've got a ton of data. So why don't we get into today's show? I'm excited to talk about some of these points and get your point of view on it. And I thought, I don't know if you saw this. I think it was maybe on Friday or maybe Saturday, but we had some interesting comments about one of my favorite topics, which is remote work. I think anyone who follows me knows that I'm passionate about that. I'm gonna share my screen here, and I'm gonna go to a video. And so, for anyone who doesn't know, I'm sure you guys have heard, but this is Nike CEO on product innovation and how it relates to remote work. So I'm just gonna play this video.
Is the kind of bold. What's been missing
here we go.
Is the kind of bold, disruptive innovation that Nike's known for. And when we look back, the reasons are fairly straightforward.
Okay.
I think Lorraine mentioned this yesterday, but our industry has gone through an awful lot of operational challenges with supply chain. All the footwear factories in Vietnam closed for 12 weeks a couple of years ago. So 25% of the world's sneakers didn't get made. And so we were navigating through that. But even more importantly, our employees were working from home for 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, it turns out it's really hard to do bold, disruptive innovation, to develop a boldly disruptive shoe on Zoom. And so our teams came back together 18 months ago in person, and we recognized this. And so we realigned our company. And over the last year, we have been ruthlessly focused on rebuilding our disruptive innovation pipeline along with our iterative innovation pipeline. So the pipeline's as strong as ever. And we're going into the period where we'll start seeing season after season great innovative product from Nike, along with the kind of storytelling we're known for. And that's why we'll drive growth.
All right. Well, I have lots of thoughts on this, and I saw a lot of people sharing on LinkedIn about it. But had you seen this video? I take it you'd seen this video over the weekend, or is it the first time watching it?
I have seen that video, and I have thoughts, some that resonate more highly to how we build it Complete, and then also anecdotes from our customers. But my first reaction is any company's strategy when it comes to remote work is not going to be one size fits all. What works for Nike may work for your company, most
Yep.
definitely will not work for another. And as an example, at Complete here, we're fully in person, 5 days a week in the heart of San Francisco. And we have a number of benefits to help our employees sustain that 100% in office culture. But it is one of the reasons why we decided to have a very innovative and collaborative culture. I'm going to steal from a friend that I heard from last week. His name is Nick Bloom. You might have seen him on LinkedIn before too.
Yeah.
And they've done a really interesting study on remote, hybrid, and fully in-person work. And I don't think it surprises anyone, Joel, when you say that fully remote work has staggered innovation in some ways. It just doesn't elicit that same level of collaboration or creativity. And so, a study that Nick and his team had done was, if we look at folks that are fully remote versus some distribution of maybe we're remote for a period of time, we come together for a period of time and then go back to remote, versus folks that were fully in person, it was hybrid actually. That was the winning combination. And if you think about that for yourself, right, it's, do I want to work on this product or problem independently? Do I want to have an opportunity to sync with my team in between and get their feedback or ideas? Or do I want to continuously do this in the presence of a team and maybe actually hinder my innovation that way too? So I do think it's a balance, and I do think it's specific to company. But that's why I'm not actually surprised by what the Nike CEO had to say.
Are you surprised then with some of like the commentary around what he said? In terms of like for example, I'm going to share my screen here again. So I thought this would be an interesting one just to even ask my network. All right. And again, this is just it's a LinkedIn poll. So you got to be, you got to take it with a grain of salt. Right. But if
just a smidge of salt.
Yeah. Just a smidge of salt. But I get good. You got 3,000 respondents.
That's great. I don't even know if I voted on this.
Yeah, and so I said, does remote work stop innovation? Right. So it's hard to get a really like a full thought around like a LinkedIn poll, but you can see the results, right? So 94% of people are saying no, 6% are saying yes. But then this, you just go through and you see a lot of comments. So Jake here, in office time needs to evolve, not something we go back to. Does it still have a place? But blaming productivity and lack of innovation is lazy, in my opinion. Plenty of companies are thriving on remote work. Here's my only problem with working in the office: one office butterfly that will stop by at your desk and bring all of their drama. So, but does this response then, does this surprise you?
If we were to change this question from stop innovation to maybe slow or delay innovation,
sure,
I would be curious to see how those results differ. Because I agree, I don't think it stops innovation. But I do think there are cases, especially if you're working on really collaborative teams, where it might take a little bit longer to get to the place that you want the team to be at. By the way, I should also mention that there is a very clear bifurcation in productivity depending on the team or department you work for. So as an example, product marketing teams rely on in-person syncs. Sometimes they'll even do these focus groups that are in person to see what type of reaction their campaigns elicit in their viewer base. Engineering, I could see why that'd be more productive remote, or it's some combination of remote or hybrid. So I do think, again, it's not a one size fits all. And I'm not surprised that some of the audience that also prefers remote can sometimes skew more senior too. So,
yeah. And look, my thought, I think now with just the conversation as a whole is, it's like you said, it's not a one size fits all. I think depends on your team, depends on the work that you're doing. And then I also think like it depends on your life situation, right? It's like for certain people, I think there's like a convenience aspect, which maybe even takes away from some of their work, you could argue. So I think there's a lot there. I think what I will be interested to see is the innovation now that comes from Nike since they're backing the up. I mean, that to me, that's the true testament. Like if now there is no innovation, now it's like, then what? And the only other thing I think about is so when I started working fully remote, I worked for a company they were built as a fully remote company. And so everything they did was in line with that culture. So we still had meetups with the team once a week, like we actually met at a hotel that was like kind of local to the bulk of the team. But it was like, and I feel like this doesn't get talked a lot about, but it's like there's a difference between being forced to work remotely to keep on operating as a company and then designing a company remotely to be successful. And I think there's been a bit of that going on where a lot of companies are kind of forced into a situation. And I think if you're forced in and you don't actually have vision for it, it's going to create a different version. Whereas if you're like, hey, I'm starting this company and we want to be a fully remote company, and this is how we're going to build our culture around it, and you're excited about it, then maybe you do things in a different way to kind of spur some of that innovation as well. And I think that's the only part I think sometimes where like, did we give it a fair, was it a fair try? So that's interesting to me. So by design, you're like in the office is how,
we even
just from like from like a recruitment standpoint, like how has that made it a challenge to recruit people? Like how do you kind of communicate that throughout the recruitment process? Just curious about that.
Yeah. One last thought I just wanted to piggyback on there was, when folks say remote, I almost always feel like it's misinterpreted for we never see our coworkers. Like,
work from jail.
That's just not the case. I know so many remote teams, customers that as a part of their offers or employee total rewards will actually call out, we have an in-person offsite policy. We get the team together once a quarter. We try to do local meetups, the WeWork or the hotel, as you called out. So there is a level of intention that is required to make any of these strategies successful, including remote work. So love that you called that out. Completely agree.
Yeah,
you asked
100%.
about in-office and how that impacts recruiting. Well, I won't sugarcoat it. It's not easy, especially with a lot of the other startups in the SF Bay Area taking the stance around hybrid. And just from a numbers perspective, Joel, it does limit how many folks we can interview and even have as part of our talent pipeline, right? Because if you're more than 100 miles away from SF, then you're probably not going to want to do that commute every day. What I will say, though, is it has surprised both ourselves and our customers to see how many folks think they want hybrid or remote, but actually enjoy the in-office culture. And one of the moments where that becomes glaringly clear is actually at the offer stage, when they're considering an offer from a company that is fully distributed, a company that is hybrid, and then a company that's fully in person. I don't think this would shock you, but it did shock me, is that folks that are more junior in their career attach in-office work with direct access to mentorship, access to upper leadership, growth opportunities. And for them, it's in-office and hybrid that feels synonymous with that type of career unlocks. And so, it has impacted our pipeline to some degree of who are the folks that are excited. We've also given some of our candidates an opportunity to trial working 5 days in office and see how it feels. And I think you would be surprised how many of them have actually enjoyed having that, nice balance of coming into the office, having a core team that they work well with, and then again, being able to kind of clock out at the end of the day.
Look, it doesn't surprise me in terms of, obviously, I could just even tell by the way you're describing things, like you're intentional about creating a culture that people want to be in. And I think this is, again, without kind of going too far off here, I think it's great. I think if you can create an environment that people want to be in, awesome. I just question how many companies are actually like trying to create like an environment that people want to be in. Because to your point, I think if you're providing, because I even just think about like myself, like when I just graduated college, last thing I would really want to have done is gone, into some kind of corner basement office and work by myself and then have to slack my boss every 10 minutes. Hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? It's like, I think a lot of young people, like you want to learn about how the business operates. And especially if you're in a startup, like you want to surround yourself with, okay, what are we actually doing? And familiarize yourself with that. So that doesn't surprise me. I think you have the social aspect, but I think where the challenge, and I always said this for companies, is like, I think for a lot of people who are like mid-level and like, maybe a little bit, feel a little bit more comfortable in their career, you've got to almost work harder now to create an environment that people want to be in. Because I think people are a lot more judgmental. I think right now you could kind of get away with it because it is a tough job market for a lot of people. So there's that feeling of, force me back to the office. Well, I know the job market's absolutely brutal, so I don't want to quit. But eventually that market's going to shift and like more companies are going to start hiring. More companies are going to start thinking about growing. I think they're saying we're in like the great stay right now. So a lot of companies are having good retention. but it's a job market, so it's going to shift.
Yeah.
And when that shifts, it's like, is that then where like, 3 or 4 recruiters in the inbox, like, hey, I got a remote opportunity, and the people like, the office isn't actually where I want to be. So what do you do to create like that kind of like an office environment that people want to be in?
Totally. If I had to summarize what you just said, it's that folks are choosing where they work based on community, in addition to a number of other factors, right? I say there are a couple of things that we have done, one of which is we empower almost actually everyone on our team to show up like business owners. So they are showing up for customer visits, they're involved in product discussions. And it doesn't matter if you're on engineering or sales or another aspect of the business, you get a front row seat to what growing a company looks like. And so
is someone getting arrested out there?
I wish I could tell you. I can't see this straight. Hopefully it's not me.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think it's an ambulance. I didn't realize you could pick that up.
Oh yeah, I love that. It's the real. That's the office sound. I mean, that's what we're missing.
There you go. There you go. Just another day in San Francisco. I was unfazed by it actually.
You're like, this is just normal.
Yeah. But here, I'll give you a good example of something that's been, great for our team. One of which is, I think a lot of folks don't understand how many different aspects go into building a business. Everything from fundraising to the senior leaders you hire to your early customers. So a few months ago, what I did was every other Thursday or so, we'd bring in someone from our community to just tell us about what their day-to-day looked like. So we had engineers learning about how to build a go-to-market function. We had designers learning about how to choose your tech stack. We had the whole team learning about what does it mean to get a Series A, a Series B, what are the benchmarks and the milestones? How do people think about funding in a way where I feel confident and happy that any employee of our team is leaving complete with more visibility and transparency around what building a successful business looks like. And one that is built and grounded in integrity and values and not just growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that. I feel like it's like I could quote that on like a LinkedIn post, because I always talk about like how few companies like actually invest in their people, and you're like, yeah, my vision is like they come in and they're in one area, but we want to teach them how they can be successful in business, which I think like, yeah, that's how you keep people engaged.
Yeah.
In an office environment, right? And like just get engaged in general. And I love that. That's probably one of the coolest things that I've heard anyone say on the show. Usually it's I'm not gonna bash other guests, but you hear a lot about like collaborative culture and like a fluff, right? A lot of people talk about fluff, but like what does that actually mean? So I love that. And I can see then where like, yeah, if I was in an office like that, hey, we're gonna help you, entrepreneurially as well. And I'm sure you get a lot of people who are thinking about their own product ideas, their own businesses. So that's highly valuable. I love that.
Totally.
Can
I share one other data point before we carry on? I was just going to say that something that I think takes a lot of our customers by surprise too is, and I'll give you a little bit of context. So one of our products is this interactive offer, replaces the very stodgy old PDF that's 40 pages long that folks are like calling their parents to help understand what every piece of legalese means. And it's fun, it's interactive, it's personalized. It has a couple different sections. There's one section where we talk through compensation. Hey, you're getting equity. What does the longer term value look like? We have a section on benefits. Here's what your healthcare looks like. By the way, most people don't know what a 401k is. We've learned that the hard way. We have a section around the team where they can meet their prospective team members, investors. And we have a section to learn more about the company. What are we working on? What milestones, what metrics have we hit?
So cool.
Joel, which of these sections do you think is most engaged with?
Well, and which is cool because and for people, they probably don't even know this, but like in your platform, you actually have data around like what people are viewing the most within the offer. So you actually have real-time data about what actually people care about. So I don't have to do LinkedIn polls going, do you care more about salary or culture? I would think, I would think the area that I think number 2, the second area I would imagine would be the compensation. And the second, I think, would be around like mission and what you're doing in the bench lining. And then maybe third, the team, but I could get that completely wrong. What?
Yeah, no, you're pretty spot on. compensation tends to be still the number one, because that's new information when they get to the offer stage. Obviously, is a very important determinant of which company they choose to work at. But second is almost always the team. They're watching every video of who they'd be working with. They're reading their bios. They're stalking their LinkedIns. Folks are attracted to people that they can learn from.
And do you kind of like link in the LinkedIn's and there? So
yeah, they create their own bios. So, you know, if you were to be on an offer, if you invested in a company, that company could have you on their team section and say, hey, Joel's one of our advisors. By the way, he has X 100,000 followers doing crazy polls for him night and day. But here's what we've learned from him.
Sold.
Yeah. And you could, you know, it could be a link to your LinkedIn. It could be the Realist Recruiter, whatever it is. But there is that flexibility to build your own profile. And last thing I'll say on this, because I'm sure you have so much more you want to talk about, there is a level of humanness that you can bring to that element of recruiting when you ask people to, you know, record a video from a candidate from wherever they take their calls, have their pet who's usually sitting under them during team meetings and have them be in the video. It just brings a level of intimacy that honestly recruiting hasn't seen in a while.
Well, look, I'm obviously a video guy, and I've been harping about video and social media for 5 years now. I actually wasn't that big of a fan of video until about 2 or 3 years ago when I started creating content on TikTok, which is obviously a video platform. And now I'm sold on it, because I think it out of every other medium, it does give you like a level of feeling connected to whoever you're viewing. And I think in the past, I know there's been a lot of like really high produced videos, and like, you know, think about these culture videos where people am I disconnected there? No, connected. These culture videos where it's like they're really well produced, they got cool music, and I think those are okay. But what I think is just even better is just taking a look at like culture and like what are people consuming. And I see it with my own content. It's like these talking head videos. Like it's just normal, authentic people talking, you know, just being themselves. And at the end of the day, you know, I think there's a lot to be learned here, even just from like the fact of like, hey, we're going against the grain. We've got people in our, you know, at our company working 5 days a week in the office. And guess what? People are accepting offers over remote. So, but I think it's when you're authentic and you're creating these environments. And then if you're able to actually put that into your offer process or your recruitment process, it's huge. And I think it's only going to continue to grow. And I think the more people come into the workforce, they obviously value content, and they want to, you just said they're going to do that homework. They're going to listen to the podcast. They're going to listen to what you're doing. They're going to listen. They're going to go and watch your TikTok page to see what you're saying. And so I think it's huge. And it doesn't surprise me. I think that trend doesn't go away. And it's like companies that get it, they're going to have an edge over companies that don't, and maybe, you know, aren't invested. So there's an article here, which I want to get your take on. And obviously you're dealing with a lot with compensation. LinkedIn, they just came up with it today. So I didn't read it in depth fully. And I usually just read this kind of top portion. But it just says job seekers get pickier on pay. It says the level of compensation that U.S. job seekers are willing to accept on a job is continuing to soar. And this is data from the New York Federal Reserve. Average U.S. worker now saying they're looking for $81,000 annually to accept a new role. And that's up from $73,000 in November, which is a pretty big jump. And they're saying it's because of inflation. And then the survey revealed that men saw at 95,000 switching jobs in March, which was almost 30,000 more than women. So that gap has actually widened, they're reporting. And then it's saying out of the people who were surveyed, 25% said that they've been looking for a job in the past 4 weeks. A record low 45% workers said they're expected to work beyond 62. I'm not sure what these other survey findings really have to do with the main point, but Can
I just pause you for a second?
Yeah, of course.
That men sought out 30,000 more than women. That's maybe a conversation for another time. But
no, I mean,
yeah,
that to me is it speaks to a lot with what you're doing and why what you're doing is so important, right? Like in giving that visualization of like how to navigate an offer and how to do these things. And we see it all the time, and we talk about it all the time in recruitment. It's like when you look at the statistics, and I think that like there's tools like BrightHire and MetaView that can analyze these conversations now. And they always show the data around like compensation that like men talk about it way more. And they're just way more almost aggressive with it in a lot of ways. But let's just start with like overall salaries going up. Does that surprise you that that's what they found over the last few months? I mean, given the job market and things like that? And is that in line with what you're seeing?
Yeah. I mean, I think taking a step back, I'm sure you've heard of the different regulations around pay transparency the last couple of years. And I think with more visibility into how companies are paying, it is shifting folks' expectations when they know that for a similar set of skills and responsibilities that, hey, that's actually 90 to 120K, this competing startup. What does surprise me, however, is, and this is probably an area where I think every recruiting team is looking for a way to do better. How do we differentiate TC, total comp, from our comp philosophy? And what I mean by that is it's very easy for folks to go around, and I'll, quote one of our favorite small no-name startups, OpenAI here. They're infamously known.
Never heard of them.
Yeah, never heard of them, right? For these really high TC packages, sometimes over $1 million, how much of that is cash versus how much of that is equity? And by the way, what type of equity are you offering? They have something called PPUs, kind of the cousin to the RSUs, my short version of that. But there's stock options, there's RSUs. Every company is structuring this a little bit differently, where if I had to look at that same article 2 years from now, I'd say that employees and candidates are going to be more demanding of understanding what that philosophy is, as opposed to even having a specific number or benchmark. Because underneath that, if I really have to think about the question behind the question, it's, do I understand it and do I believe it's fair, versus the actual number that's being represented or even shopped around as part of these articles. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that does make sense. I know are you seeing though, obviously, because again, like you said, they're just talking about the salary, right? So it's not looking at these overall packages, but even from like a salary perspective, like, are you seeing or hearing that like candidates are wanting just bigger bases than they did a year ago, 2 years ago?
Anecdotally, no. But I think, again, this is something that just keeps getting missed. You could have a company offering you $90,000 with absolutely no benefits or maybe a very minimal contribution plan. And then another company that's offering you maybe 80, 85, and they have full premium coverage for dependents and spouses. That in and of itself might be tens of thousands of dollars. And so we're starting to see this arithmetic shift from, instead of just salary or just equity, to what is the all-in for me as an employee? And can I really be diligent about understanding every aspect of this? Does that make sense?
It does make it. And you mentioned something too, where you mentioned that people don't know what a 401k is, right? Which I'm sure like some people do, some people don't, right? Everyone's got like a different education. But as you've kind of dived into compensation and just seeing like working in this space around like offers and negotiation, and is it surprising that even just people who are really well educated like don't actually understand how these compensation packages work?
Yeah, it's without being specific, I sometimes am a part of customer calls, and we're talking CTOs, co-founders of 100-person startups, maybe even thousands of employees that are still asking some of these questions. And so that level of knowledge is something that goes far beyond just candidates and recruiters. By the way, we do have a product that's employee facing. We see a lot of similar engagement data of employees at the company don't understand what those full benefits are. The company might have had a stipend for work from home, and they just didn't know it existed. And it's $800 stipend year over year, right? So sometimes I joke with our team that we're in the education and trust space.
Well, you are. Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
Well,
yeah.
And which I think is amazing, by the way. I mean, I think, even these idea of like your interactive offer is amazing. And I think the shame of it in reality is like, again, like a lot of people are going to social media for these answers. And I've seen some good advice and I've seen some like just really, really bad advice. Right. Mm-hmm. But it all boils down to this education piece. What do you, kind of circling back around to this pay inequity, right, between male and female and I'm sure other genders as well. What is what are some of the things that you're trying to work on to kind of bridge that gap? And like, if you're talking a recruiter, right? There's a lot of recruiters listening and people who are involved in hiring. What in your mind, like how do we really start to bridge the gap? Because from what I've seen, there's been a lot of talk around like there's been some good things going on, but clearly not if that's what the data is showing, right?
Yeah. If I had one word of advice for any recruiter who's listening to this, it would be understand your company's comp philosophy and be able to speak to it better than your competing company's recruiter.
And when you say comp philosophy, just break that down as well, because I'm sure
Yeah.
even a lot of recruiters don't even know what that means.
Totally. And actually, I'm happy to send you a link to this free comp philosophy generator that walks through some of the common questions. But comp philosophy, the one sentence summary is how and who do we pay? Are we basing this off of location? What's our philosophy around who gets promoted, when they get promoted? Do they get equity refreshes? What type of benchmarking data do we use? It's essentially a one-page doc that recaps what are our principles around how we decide comp at the company. And that is at the crux of how a lot of these candidates and employees who are choosing to stay at their company are making their decision around that. Going back to that example of the 90,000 and that number increasing, something that I'd be thinking about if I were on the job market right now is which companies have fast progression. Am I joining a company that starts at 90,000, but then maybe doesn't offer a promo for the next 3 years? Or, companies where they have smaller bite-sized promotion or progression that would unlock a higher salary at a very sooner point in time. So that would be my one piece of advice. Understand the company's comp philosophy. And this is definitely a trend we've been seeing, especially across our AI customers today. You have to be able to speak to your own philosophy, but also your competitors. Because guess who candidates are looking to for information? And, I brought up that example of OpenAI. Let's say I'm getting an offer from one company that's giving stock options, but all I'm reading about on LinkedIn are PPUs. Guess what they're going to ask? Hey, how's this different from PPUs? Why are stock options better in this case? Can you help me understand why I should be joining your company versus, these few other data points I've read about online? So recruiters really have to be intelligent and confident about their responses there.
Which, I'm not going to speak for all recruiters here, but I know a lot of the offers I've been involved in. It's really, really interesting because it's definitely just it's a weird conversation. It's like people are just trying to get the deal done, and it's pushed over, right? Like an acceptance. And I think there's a level of fear even there with like the candidate, like, oh, I don't want to lose the offer. I don't want to ask like too many questions. So I think an education piece, and clearly by what you said, there's a lot that goes into an offer, and I think there's a lot more than people think. And so that's why it's always interesting too, like when people talk about like, well, how do you discuss salary in an interview? And it's always like, well, just tell me what your budget is. And it's like, clearly that's like, okay, even if you get the budget, it's like, you're not going into the full, like, all right, well, walk me through like your health benefits, walk me through this, walk me through the paternity leave, walk me through, you're not walking through you're literally just getting a tiny range. And then, oh yeah, ballpark, we're the same. Let's move on to process. And it's like,
totally.
So yeah, I think so yeah, definitely send me that link too. Cause I think, what I'd also love to do is, I don't know if there's a way, maybe I could put that link on obviously these show notes, but if that's open to everybody, I think it could be just a great education piece. Yeah.
By the way, don't even get me started about leave policies. I'm probably preaching to the choir when I say this, but no one wants to be asking their hiring manager about a potential, maybe soon to come leave without feeling like that might impact their candidacy at the company.
Which is crazy.
So sometimes even just knowing that the company has these benefits and the candidate doesn't have to ask about it, already a leg up for some of these teams that we work with. I didn't answer your question about pay equity, but my one sentence answer to how recruiters can do better at that is help candidates with the education around comp, regardless of whether they ask for it or not. Because to your point, there are, and without being specific, there are pockets of candidates that are a lot more forthcoming about asking their questions versus others that seek to, personal networks, their own support system. Be that resource for everyone, regardless of whether they ask or not, and do it quickly, because that's what's going to give you the opportunity to win faster than some of the other folks.
And that's like true salary transparency. When we talk about salary transparency, I just think like it's become almost like, oh, just put a range on the job description. That's it. I was transparent with the salary, and it's like that's not what I mean. When I think of transparency, I think of like there's a level of like honesty and like opening things up and like making sure people feel really, really comfortable with everything. So talking about salary transparency, I know we've touched on it a little bit. Curious to get your thoughts. Like, do you hurt things, help things? Like, what is it working? Like, where are we at with this?
Yeah. Oh boy.
Like how I just threw that one in there.
I'll start with, as someone who's worked in compensation prior, it is disappointing. It feels like we had a tee up, from legislators to help make some strides around visibility and transparency, both internally versus externally at a company. Yep. And more often than not, Joel, I will see the job postings with the 50 to 500,000 ranges. And I think we all know they're not hiring between 50,000 and 500,000 for a specific role. So,
yeah,
I think candidates pick up on that. Is this the company that's doing the heavy lifting to make strides for pay transparency, or are they just trying to meet a legal requirement? I'd say what has been a positive uplift, and again, this is something we're privy to because we help with more than just offers. Like we actually are looking at promotions and, what the average percentage increase is across certain folks at performance levels. We are seeing more teams be diligent about pay parity. So if they are, let's say we're, interviewing you, Joel, hiring managers are asking this question a little bit more of, hey, how does Joel compare to folks that we've already hired? If, Joel were ever to figure out what his direct reports were making, would he ever be angry, upset, disappointed? And so I do think it has caused customers to be a little bit more thoughtful about how they're thinking about internal parity, even if they haven't quite taken that step towards external full transparency on job postings. And I think we'll get there, but I'll also be the one to say that if I had to choose between explicit job ranges or more transparent comp philosophies, I would absolutely choose the latter. I think it's more important for folks to understand how they're getting paid and how that pay changes over time than just to see an arbitrary 200,000 window on their job range, right? Tell me, if I'm going to move to the UK, how's my comp going to change? Is it going to change or is it going to be unaffected? These are some of the hard questions that I think we're seeing recruiters get a lot more often as well.
Yeah. And look, I think I love that. I think I'm going to start talking about this more as well, because it's there's like the education piece in there. And, I think the more you can educate people throughout the offer stage, the better. And like, so they can see everything and like the more interactive it is. And I also think like a lot of it is, I keep coming back to like when I look at like employee engagement data, how like employee engagement's at like an all-time low, and like the retention's higher now because people aren't want to leave because they know it's a bad job market, but it's not great. And so I just can't help but think that like there are like these educational things, around offers and around like your career trajectory that I think for a long time, like people have been like, okay. And like, they've just been like, yeah, I don't want to ruffle the feathers, I don't want to, that seems awkward. But I think that the conversation now is like more people are getting comfortable. And like, I know there's been more videos on social media recently where like, you'll have like a product manager that's like breaking down their salary and what they earn and the equity. And then I know, is it Salary Transparency Street on like TikTok? They've got like millions of followers, and they're just going up to people in the street, asking them like, how much you make? And like, how does that break down? And I think those conversations are helpful, right? Because it's like, it does take away that. And at the end of the day, as a company, one thing that I think gets overlooked all the time is like, are your employees, like, are they feeling like financially healthy? Are they feeling like they're getting compensated? Because if they don't, you mentioned it. I mean, like you show me the data here as well. Like how many times are people going back to their offers and like looking at the finances, right? It's like how many like the average, what's the average? What's that number look like?
Oh my God. Actually, Joel, I'd love to, maybe we'll do a poll at some point and just ask recruiters, how many times do they think their candidates are looking at the offers or the offer emails?
Hey, we could do a poll this week on that. Let's do it.
Let's do it. And I'll spoil it a little bit, but it is, within 50 to 100. And maybe as a follow-up, we can disclose what the actual number is. But that always surprises people, just thinking, oh my God, they looked at this 50 times before they made a decision. I'm like, what do you expect? How many candidates do you think know all these things by default when, teams are still doing trainings internally quarter over quarter about this? One other thought I'll add here is some of the best companies we've partnered with empower their hiring managers to be well-versed on these topics.
Huge.
And I can give a shout out to, Lindsay. He leads engineering at a company called Vercel, someone who's just been really involved in the details and made himself available to direct reports. But not every engineer has that type of support system or even the level of openness from their executive team to have conversations around progression, comm, and whatnot.
Yeah, it's huge. Well, look, I know we've run out of time here on today's episode, but I know there's a ton of value here. I think super interesting too. And you know what I love most too, like that going back to that first, like remote work stifles innovation.
Yeah.
I love, like, I'm all about remote work, but I love that. Like, I didn't even know that you had all your employees in the office 5 days a week. But I love it. And I think this whole conversation around compensation and people being educated and understanding is fascinating as well. Where can people find out more about Complete, more about yourself? Like, where are you hanging out these days?
Yeah.
Other than the office in San Francisco.
You just knock on our door and we'll open that right up for you. Complete.so is our website. Please shoot us a note if you have any questions. My email is just my first name at complete.so. And then I'm on a similar platform as you, Joel, all over LinkedIn. So if you ever have questions or follow-ups for today's conversation, drop me a note and I'd be happy to chat more.
Are you going to any more conferences this year as well? What are the good ones we need to go to?
TBD. I can't say I've quite figured out the calendar that far in advance, but maybe I'll pick your brain about that as a next step.
All right. Well, guys, look, I would say go connect with Rani on LinkedIn. Follow her. Just follow her stuff. And then we'll put the link to the salary guide as well, compensation guide, so you can kind of understand. Because I think this is hugely important. And I will say, I get more questions on my TikTok lives, my Instagram lives around compensation. And most of the time I'm like, go to HR. I don't know the answer to it. Just being honest. But I think having these resources is huge. So we're going to put those resources on the show notes. We'll put them in any of the social media that we're doing. And guys, we will be back next week with another guest as well. We're going to be talking about AI and sourcing and all this good stuff. Because that's all we talk about now is just AI. Like, everything is AI. So we got to make sure we talk about that. But thank you so much for joining me today. It was great to have you on, and I think we're gonna get some great clips out of this as well, which people are gonna find super valuable. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Joel. And AMA on comp is always welcome.
Yeah, well, maybe we should do like an interactive one like that. I'll pull my TikTok and Instagram network on that, because I'm sure we could get tons of people packed in for that one.
I can't wait. I can't wait for the polls that come out of this too. So you got me on the edge of my seat.
I love it. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next week. And if you made it this far in the show, well done. Appreciate you. And if you got questions for me, you can always just DM me on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you are. So see you guys next week.